Yeah, downloading's easy too. You know, I can even send email on the internet. And of course, there's my personal favorite, live chat. That's how I met my new kayaking buddies. We'll check that out later, after the game.
So how do you get America Online?
Oh, well, that's easy too. You just call their 800 number.
I gotta check this out.
Call 1-800-614-3434 now for your free America Online Startup Kit with free software and 10 free online hours. It's everything you need to get online. So call 1-800-614-3434.
So I'm back from a couple weeks off and back to the IMDB bottom 100. I was fully prepared to go with number 75, Jaws 3D. I heard online that all the Jaws movies were streaming for free on AMC's website, and I was excited to revisit that franchise. I've never seen 3, but I'm a huge fan of the original, one of my favorite movies, and I enjoyed Jaws 2 from what I remember. I thought a lot about what I was going to say. I was prepared to talk about my childhood obsession with Steven Spielberg, spurred by visits to Universal Studios, which at the time had rides based on E.T., Jurassic Park, and of course the section of the studio tour was basically a Jaws attraction. I was ready to really get into these movies, the underdog with a troubled production that invented the modern blockbuster. I was ready to mention Jaws 4 and then end the video with, but that's a story for another day. Then I went to watch the first movie. Those motherfuckers lied. AMC doesn't have any Jaws movies, and I'm stuck with number 68, 2002's Fear.com, the next movie that's streaming somewhere I can get to it. Streaming for free on Tubi because at this point, where else would it be? Okay, so I actually do kind of remember this movie coming out. At that point I think I was 7 or something, but I sort of remember it mostly from the ads in the entertainment section of the newspaper, which I looked through back then because even then I was pathetic. And I think probably most of the reason I remembered it was because of the URL for the movie's website, which I think might have also been in a radio commercial for the movie, and it was called, of course, fear.com.com. You know, when you're 7 you don't think about it, but as an adult you hear the title Fear.com and expect some fun schlock. Basically sounds pretty much the same as if they called it The Computer of Death with 5 exclamation points. Sure, it's not going to be Jaws, but it could at least be a fun watch in that Piranha 3D way. Nope, this is a serious horror film. We're dark and scary. Yeah, it just happens to be about a website that has the name Fear.com. That's actually not true. It's called Fear.com.com. Yet the characters still refer to it as Fear.com, which is not a good way to describe it to people. I mean, you say Facebook or something, even if the person you're talking to is somehow lucky enough to have never heard of the site, they know that there's a .com at the end. With this, people would probably just type in fear and then a .com like how any normal person would make into a domain name. Yes, the movie's title is misleading. It should have been more accurate, so its website could have been fear.com.com.com. Also, that website is no longer up, so I can't see if it's modeled after the fear.com in the movie. Which sucks because honestly that would have been pretty cool to visit. Either way, the movie didn't make me too scared to look that site up, so that's your first failure. But enough pointless bullshit, let's get into the movie. First, the Wikipedia background shit. The villain was played by Stephen Reed because he was apparently the director's favorite actor. The director also stated that his goal was to make this movie look basically like a nightmare. We'll get into whether that worked later. Even though it takes place in New York City, the producers instead scoured locations in Canada and Luxembourg that they thought looked like New York. As a result, the director said that he was unsatisfied with how the city looked. He also said that in retrospect, Natasha McElhone was miscast as the female lead. I personally don't think she was any worse than the other actors, none of whom were great, but I guess he knows more about his movie's shortcomings than I do. It was originally given an NC-17 rating but was trimmed down to an R. It opened at the end of summer 2002 to overwhelmingly negative reception from critics, and the audience's Screen by CinemaScore gave it an F rating, making it one of only 22 films to get that honor. It was also unable to make back even half of its $40 million budget. While looking for the trailer on YouTube, the search results also showed a WatchMojo video for biggest horror movie bombs. Sure enough, Fear.com was at number 6, ranking higher than infamous thinkers such as Alone in the Dark. If you're curious, number 1 was Event Horizon. Sad, I know, it just didn't make the money people think it deserved. Anyway, my experience watching it. Opens on a low point. A guy in a dark subway station which is clearly a soundstage. Probably the most obviously fake New York set in the entire movie. Despite this, the scene still has some creepy atmosphere going for it. Until things actually start happening, of course. So at some point a little girl slurs him onto the train tracks and then the train is coming. So now he's trying to run away from the train and even tries this thing where he presses himself against the wall so that it won't hit him. All the while there is a platform right next to him. Fortunately, the rest of this movie looks at least competent. Basically, it's about the detectives investigating this guy's death and a bunch of others that are similar. The thing it turns out that they have in common is that they all visited fear.com.com. The website basically shows live streams of some serial killer torturing women to death, and everybody who visits that site dies in 48 hours. It's a dark movie, and I mean partially in the sense that every scene takes place in dim lighting. Geez, do light switches not exist in this Luxembourg version of New York? Although I guess it matches what's going on here in this movie about, once again, people being tortured to death online. Feels like a mixture of Seven and The Ring, except bad. This actually came out a few months before The Ring, and it was still accused of ripping it off. The original Ringu, I mean. In addition to Videodrone and some other Japanese horror called Cairo. I haven't seen any of those other two movies, but I've seen both Ring movies, and I could say this feels more like the American one. Basically, while Ringu was a slow burn, The Ring had more creepy stuff throughout. So this is basically the setup for The Ring to do the same thing, but better. And honestly, this has a bit more effective creepy stuff than most people gave it credit for. The high points are when it's focused on atmosphere. In the words of Roger Ebert, even when the screenplay is a mess, the visuals are enough to make it the rare bad movie you actually want to see. I guess I'd say this is more the kind you wouldn't hate to see too much. Also, that review is quoted 3 times in the Wikipedia, and all of them I feel fit into this video. I mean, yes, there are definitely a few misses here. Like, occasionally there would be some scenes after characters visit fear.com.com when they see something scary and it's just a bunch of stylized quick shots and I couldn't tell what the hell was going on. Kinda like what Saw did occasionally, except that was coherent. There's also a scene of a girl getting kidnapped by the serial killer that's set to a Rammstein song, one of their heavier ones, which, as it turns out, isn't the scariest music to set a horror scene to. And in hindsight, that scene kinda goes on for a little too long. When it's over, we're on to the second verse and nothing has happened except for her struggling. At some point I was annoyed by the girl's screams for getting in the way of the song, which was much more interesting than the rest of this scene by now. Anyway, Roger Ebert called this movie one of the most graphic horror films he'd ever seen. I'm going to presume he didn't mean in terms of on-screen violence because I can think of much worse in that regard. Either way, the rest of the decade isn't going to be much fun for him, or anyone really for that matter. This was not a precursor to that torture porn fad that would define horror for the 2000s. Don't get me wrong, there definitely is a lot of blood here. Yes, it allegedly shows shots of torture and that kind of stuff on the website, but they're so quick and poorly lit I honestly couldn't tell what I was looking at most of the time. That's one way to avoid NC-17, just make the adult content completely incoherent. Speaking of completely incoherent, the story. It makes no sense. It's confusing, but in the way that when I try to explain why it just seems like I'm just pointing out plot holes. Anyway, spoilers for a 20-year-old movie nobody liked. So basically, fear.com.com is controlled by one of the killer's victims who wants revenge and wants to kill anybody who watches this kind of shit. But the killer is still running the website, and has been inexplicably been able to stream his kills onto it without actually going onto it and dying. And the girl's face is all over the website. First thing the characters see when they log on is her talking directly to them. And the killer apparently doesn't see anything unusual about that. Also, how does the site still have viewers if they're all dying? You'd think the killer would notice such steep drops in his audience. You can't be that unpopular all of a sudden. Wait, are my viewers dying? Whoops. Well, sucks to be you. Also, if you remember me talking about the first scene, there's a little ghost girl. She becomes a recurring thing throughout this movie, and she's playing with a ball. As the movie goes on, we find out that she's the victim as a child. What we never find out is why people are seeing the child version of her with a ball. She was an adult when she died. Why the hell is she a kid in random scenes? I mean, other than little girls are creepy. So, does it feel like a nightmare? Well, there are a few scenes, mostly of people viewing the website. But other than that, the fact that it spends a lot of time trying to be a gritty, semi-realistic detective movie doesn't help in that regard. Until we get to the end. Once again, Roger Ebert. He said that if the last 20 minutes or so was made by a German impressionist in the 20s, we'd be calling it a masterpiece. Namely, just one part of it. Okay, so the cops found the killer in the middle of one of his torture sessions. They free the girl and she stumbles away by herself and she's suddenly out of the scene, never to be mentioned again. That's not what we're talking about here. But the killer is still trying to attack the cops. Even trying to make one the new star of his stream, making no attempt to get the victim, who's probably like a few feet away now. But then the other cop logs on to fear.com.com, and the killer sees his own website, presumably for the first time, or the site just waited until now to have any impact on him, and the cop somehow just knew that would happen. And it seems to put him into a dream or something, which is where things actually get surreal and nightmarish, with a little bit of German expressionist homage. And for what it's worth, this is a definite high point. And I'm just gonna presume the victim died of her injuries off screen since nobody even tried to help her after she was freed. Anyway, the last scene shows the allegedly miscast female lead in her apartment. The phone rings, but there's nobody on the other side, and this apparently scares her. This is never explained as having anything to do with the rest of the movie. It could have easily just been a wrong number. Maybe it'll be explained in the sequel, 1-800-FEAR, which of course would be about a hotline called 1-800-1800-FEAR. So anyway, this movie has its moments, but it's stupid and makes no goddamn sense. Oh yeah, and the acting and dialogue suck too. When that domain name isn't the dumbest thing in your movie, you screwed up. I missed out on Jaws for this. However, I guess one thing that has aged well, the internet is a terrible thing. Subscribe to my channel, and join my Patreon that I made years after I started this channel but still before I had a fucking audience. Link in the description.